Sweet on Motoring 90.
The vans can go maximum range is 60 miles, and that's normal urban driving. Maximum speed is about 55 miles per hour.
You got to drive on a racetrack like this like you got an egg under the gas pedal. You just real gently on it and real gently off, or you end up and got it sideways all the time.
Motoring 90 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.
Hello everybody and welcome to Motoring 90, the program for you, the driving audience. You know, it's no secret that cars cost a lot of money these days, so it pays to keep them looking good. Well, later on we're going to meet some people who specialize in keeping cars clean. It's called detailing, and believe me, it is big business. But first, we're going to join Sandra Neal. And Sandra has a story all about transportation, electricity, and yes, even the environment.
It's not an assembly line, not yet anyways, but here in Toronto, Vima International converts commercial vehicles for export. But these vans don't run on gasoline. Instead, their power is electricity. General Motors of Canada provides the full-size vans, and Vima, a division of Magna International, equips them with electric motors and lead-acid batteries.
Canada is definitely at the forefront in terms of our quest to find an environmentally benign vehicle. There's definitely, competition out there. It's a growing field, but there's a lot of research and development going on, and Canada and Vima intends to be at the head of the game. The benefits we think are many. You're using electricity. The cost of that is a lot lower. You're looking at something that from an environmental basis is very, very benign. You don't have gasoline, so you don't have pollution.
And the fact that electric vehicles emit no pollution has these vans being shipped across the border to heavily polluted cities like Los Angeles and New York. The production has been a 2-year project for Vima, resulting in just over 24 prototypes for American export. But the future calls for dramatic expansion, an assembly line type of operation to accommodate the production of 10,000 vehicles for the city of LA.
Well, right now we have 7 people working in the prototype shop. There is a lot of hands-on work. These first 33, there's a lot of prototype work such as ironing the bugs out. As you can see, there's a substantial difference between this and a conventional internal combustion engine. This is a DC traction motor. It's somewhat lighter than a conventional V8. This particular motor weighs 360 pounds. It puts out about 56 horsepower. It runs through a gear set back here, through a drive shaft to the rear differential. This is mounted in the rear of the vehicle. Electric vehicles are the way of the future. Non-emission, very low in pollution, very quiet. They're actually less costly to maintain. I think you'll see considerably more electric vehicles, yes. What we have here is the battery tray. This is composed of 32 6-volt deep cycle type batteries. The entire battery tray weighs 2,800 pounds. We now raise the battery tray up, and it fits in 4 sockets in the vehicle where it is secured.
It's a very, very quiet humming sound under the hood, and that's probably, the biggest difference. The vans can go maximum range is 60 miles, and that's normal urban driving. Maximum speed is about 55 miles per hour. The life expectancy of the van is anywhere between 8 and 10 years. The life expectancy of the actual battery tray is about 3 to 4 years. Right now, you're looking at just under $40,000 US. When you talk about the life cycle of the vehicle, you're looking at something that lasts longer than a normal internal combustion engine, although the price is almost double that of a normal G-van. You also can look at it in terms of, although the price is higher, you're looking at the difference in price as being prepaid fuel.
How would we service these vehicles? Obviously, you wouldn't be able to go to a gas station and say, fill her up with electricity.
No, we're not at that stage quite yet, although that will happen. But right now, because we're dealing with utility companies and fleet operators, the recharging will take place in the actual utility, fleet homes themselves.
The people at Vima predict we'll see electrically operated vehicles on Canadian streets in the summer of 1990, but they'll be utility vans, and their drivers will have to power up at charge stations overnight. Sandra Neal for Motoring 90.
when Motoring 90 returns, checking out the Celica. Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive we look at the 1990 Celica GTS. Now this is the car that will lead Toyota into the 90s. Back in 1970 the Celica nameplate first appeared. Since then it's appeared on some 3.25 million cars. The new pinch-waist styling with the large fender bulges is yet another attractive styling rendition of the popular Celica. Several people pointed out the striking similarities between the lines of this car and two other vehicles tested earlier this series. I'll leave that for you to decide though. The driver is treated to a clean, clear and very logical dash configuration. All-round visibility is good, and unlike many cars you can actually operate the heater controls with gloves on. All other driver controls are well placed and easy to use with the exception of the wiper switch. This one you'll have to study the owner's manual and practice the operation for a while to get it down pat. The stereo radio cassette CD player features no less than 10 speakers, and the sound quality, as you might expect, is superb. The trunk is a fair size, but it's the versatility that garners the marks here, and I did like the security locks located on the seat backs. As with most cars that fall into this category, the rear seat room is tight to say the least. The Celica GTS features a four-wheel disc brake setup that is well balanced. During brake testing, the brakes themselves performed very well. It was the poor showing the tyres gave that accounted for the lengthy 115-foot stopping distances. Toyota's superb ABS system is an option and one worth investing in if you're considering a new Celica. The 2200 16-valve twin-cam engine pumps out a healthy 130 horsepower. This accounts for the good showing in the acceleration test. We managed to reach the 100k mark in a titch over 8 seconds. The redesigned suspension is taut, well balanced and comfortable. During pylon testing, the Celica passed with flying colours. One point though is that on anything other than perfectly dry pavement, the low-profile Dunlop tyres are not as sure-footed as they should be. In the snow, they're a complete and utter disaster. If you're contemplating the purchase of a Celica, I would suggest alternative rubber. This week my pet peeve is to do with the tilt feature on the Celica. Each time you get out of the car, the steering wheel pops up out of the way. You do your groceries, you come back, you get into the car, you start the car, you're ready to drive off. I forgot to pull it back down again. In all the time I drove the car, which was just over 1,000 kilometers, I never did get used to this feature. Anyway, now to the scoreboard and see how I rated the rest of the 1990 Celica GTS. The revised suspension setup gives the Celica much better all-round handling characteristics. During the pylon test, the car felt nice and tight, while on the open road, the spring rates offer a comfortable ride. Generally, a very well-balanced setup. The Celica's four-wheel disc brake setup performed well during the brake test. If the tyres were the equal of the brakes, our stopping distances would have been much shorter than the 115 feet we recorded. At a tick over 8 seconds to the 100k mark, the Celica is quick. The slick-shifting 5-speed gearbox complements Toyota's new 2.2-litre engine very nicely. All in all, a well-rounded package. Generally a quiet environment in which to enjoy the superb sound offered by the radio. As with all twin-cam motors though, the engine whines a bit higher up the RPM range. This becomes evident in the Celica at anything over 3,500 RPM. We averaged a commendable 10.4 litres per 100 kilometres or 27 miles per gallon. I think this is superb given the gusto the car offers. As with previous models, the newest Celica will provide some very stiff competition. The new free-revving 2.2-litre engine is a delight to push, and the improved suspension allows the driver to do so. In short, another example of just how good Toyota engineering can be.
We're now at Inside Out Automobile Cleaning and Detailing in downtown Toronto. And as we're about to find out, keeping your car clean has become big business.
Well, I would say the business area has been growing steadily for about the last few years. We're finding more and more people are becoming more interested in having their car kept clean and driving a clean vehicle. The cost of vehicles now in comparison to years ago has increased dramatically, and to offset the cost of resale, you want to keep your car in as best shape as you can, and that's one of the reasons more and more people are getting involved in this business. In the industry, there are different levels of clean, and we try to bring ours to the highest. We get involved in cleaning all the edges using toothbrushes, Q-tips, compounding and polishing the car to remove scratches, to remove oxidation, fading, discoloration, take tree sap off, marks, animal scratches, animal hair removal. There's a variety of things involved, anywhere through, all the way through to leather treatments and applications to different parts of the vehicle to make sure they're perfect in all edges. Engines are cleaned and dressed and detailed. Everything, the wheel wells, the rims, all cleaned. We're making sure every part of the vehicle is totally clean. It's like getting back into a brand new car.
Are some people quite amazed at what you can do with a car here?
I think so. I mean, I've seen people's faces when they walk back in and they're looking at their car and they can't believe it's the same car they just got out of when they brought it here that morning. And they get it back the same afternoon. And the other things that we offer them, conveniences that they get to have while their car is being serviced, courtesy vehicles that we have, waiting area, office drop-off, return. We're trying to make it easy so that anyone is able to take advantage of the service and have their car cleaned and kept clean.
Well, we're now going to leave the gentleman who specializes in keeping your car clean and join the guy who's the expert on keeping your four wheels in good running order. And of course, I'm talking about our resident mechanic on Motoring 90, Bill Gardiner.
You may remember last week we were talking about timing belts in overhead cam engines. Well, this is a more conventional V8 type engine. The camshaft is in the block. It's not an overhead cam engine. You can see how close the center line of the camshaft and the crankshaft are together. For that reason, the most popular method of driving that camshaft is with a chain. Now, this particular one is a high-vo chain. Some cars use a high-vo chain. Other cars use a roller-type chain, very much like a bicycle chain. In either case, it's referred to as the timing chain, and it keeps the camshaft and crankshaft synchronized. Now, this engine has a fair amount of wear in the chain. You can see a lot of slop on this side. And also, it has a nylon-coated camshaft sprocket. This nylon coating here on the teeth makes it run quietly, but eventually it gets hard and brittle, breaks off, and then the camshaft chain jumps a tooth or two and gets out of sync. You end up with a very lazy engine or an engine that you can't start at all. Now, this engine displays a rather interesting problem that's become fairly common on today's engines. With lighter weight materials being used, many intake manifolds are made of aluminum. This particular engine had one. Now, the cylinder heads on this engine are cast iron. The aluminum intake manifold sits right here, and this is a coolant port right here. Those dissimilar metals tend to cause a reaction, and the gasket that separates the two has become eaten out by that reaction. You can see it's quite eaten away here. Now, what happens then is you get an antifreeze leak into the crankcase. This engine had it, and it causes a really thick black sludge to build up in the crankcase. The antifreeze mixes with the oil, and eventually it causes a lot of engine damage. Now, this engine had regular oil changes, and the rest of the crankcase is quite clean. You can see that you can wipe it, and it's quite clean. The oil, the detergency of the oil has kept it clean. Right here where it had the antifreeze leak, big mess. What you're looking at here is the valve train and the valve action of number 7 cylinder on this V8 engine. It's got a problem on this cylinder. You can see the push rods here and the valve rocker arms and valve springs down here. Now, the rocker arms actuate the valves, and you should, when I crank the engine, you should see these rocker arms moving almost equally. Now, on this particular engine, the exhaust lobe is worn out on number 7 cylinder, and this rocker arm is just going to flutter slightly while the intake side moves normally. That's going to cause a backfiring engine and very poor performance. Now, we're just going to carefully remove the camshaft from this engine. You have to be very careful not to nick the cam bearings as we're taking it out. It's interesting to note the camshaft really is the heart of the engine, and it can make or break the performance of your engine. Those really lazy, poor performing cars of the middle 70s had some very mild camshafts in them. And the cars today are much peppier, much better throttle response and fuel economy, and one of the reasons is the camshaft as well as higher compression ratios today. Now, we're removing it very carefully. When we get it all the way out, you're going to be able to see that lobe that we talked about earlier, the number 7 lobe, the exhaust lobe for number 7 cylinder on this engine. There's almost nothing left, just a little nub there. We should see a nice, sharply defined lobe like we see here on these other cylinders. and it's really worn into the foot of the lifter. The lifter is now slightly concaved. A new lifter is slightly convex, and the lifter lobe on the camshaft is sloped slightly to the rear so that as the camshaft turns around, the lifter rotates slightly. That makes a nice even wear on the foot of the lifter. Prevents it from getting spotty wear like we've got on this one and wearing completely through. What we've seen today, a worn out camshaft, is one of the more expensive repair jobs that you could be looking at on a car. $700 to $800 is not unreasonable for a job like this. Now, how can you prevent something like this? Well, there's a lot of things. For one, don't let your car idle for prolonged periods. That's very hard on camshafts, and it's very wasteful on fuel. Also, use quality oil and filters and change them regularly. Check them regularly. Make sure they're full and clean. Service them regularly. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardiner for Motoring 90.
Still ahead on Motoring 90, sprints with power to spare.
Well, sooner or later, I knew they'd put me to work here at Inside Out. All right, it's now time to leave the shop, and we're going to join Steve Grant, who recently found himself at the racetrack, and he quickly discovered that having a clean car is not a priority. What is important is power, lots of power.
It is becoming more sophisticated, there's no question about that, but that doesn't mean that it still isn't a driver's formula. You know, all the changes in the world are great, but if you don't have somebody who can go out and pedal it, you're not going to win. And it's still, you know, a lot of people like to downplay the human element. I think if nothing else, maybe it's become even more important.
Could anyone win an Indy race with the right equipment? Well, that's long been the argument, especially with the dominance of the Chevrolet engines. But with sprint cars, everyone has the same machinery, and there's no argument. Driverability is at the forefront.
It's fun racing. I've run Indy cars and NASCAR cars and just really about every kind of race car there is. These are the most fun race cars. The driver means more in this type of racing than it does in like big track racing. You know, you talk about Indy cars or NASCAR cars, 95% of how fast a guy goes is the equipment, not the driver's ability. In this thing, you know, there's a whole lot of race cars out here that are just as fast. It's just, you've got to really finesse the car. And, you know, that's what you got to do.
The cars weigh 1,400 pounds and have about 650 horsepower or so, and at times it can get real squirrely for you if your car's not handling right. Handling's the key, especially on a track like this with such tight corners.
Well, they don't handle nowhere near like an Indy car, but power-wise, the Chevrolet, they got just as much power, and they have actually more torque than an Indy car motor. Just they don't run them because I think they'd have a problem with them running 500 miles.
Billy Vukovich III is no slouch when it comes to car racing. In fact, A.J. Foyt also raced sprints in a sport that used to be regarded as a mandatory stop on the way to the big leagues.
Yeah, you know, it's a good series, and you can make a little money, and they're fun cars to run, and you don't really have to buy a ride in these cars like you do in Indy cars, so you can get a ride on your ability, and whereas Indy cars, you know, you have to come up with money. It used to be more of a stepping stone, but now it's just more for the, you know, the love of racing to do it. Now you got to come up through, you know, the road race types to be able to get to Indy.
Well, certainly this type of racing is the forerunner of Indianapolis. It's been around a long, long time. It's new to Canada. We think we can make it work, and we think that the fans will support it. Sprint car racing is awesome. You've seen it here now. And these cars, when they make a mistake or something happens, they're into the wall pretty quickly. And that, you know, in any man's language, takes a good driver to handle. You know.
It's amazing to think about it, but these cars only weigh about 1,400 pounds. They turn about 700 horsepower. And look where the driver sits. This is the drivetrain right here. And if you can see the gas pedal way down there, there's really a short little distance between the floor and the gas pedal, so it's either on or off. And it's usually on.
You got to drive on a racetrack like this like you got an egg under the gas pedal. You just real gently on it and real gently off, or you end up and, you know, got it sideways all the time. So, yeah, you know, on a racetrack like this, you try to adjust the cables and stuff and linkage, so you got a little more throw on it. And you need more throw on a pavement. You need less throw on the dirt.
Right.
So, But when you come to a pavement track like this, you try to get as much as you can and just really drive it, careful.
Sprint cars used to run exclusively on dirt tracks, but in the last few years, the trend has been to race on pavement. Now they go even faster.
The speeds of the cars on the straightaways is just fabulous. It really is kind of a chore to keep up with everybody, but it's come along all right. Fortunately, we ended up putting the two shows together in one day, so by this time of night, things are going pretty well. First thing this afternoon was a little shaky, but we managed to pull our way through it.
It doesn't take long to get to 100 miles an hour. It's like that, So, yeah, it's just the type of race car it is, really.
25 sprint cars are lining up right now for the final event, and this should be really interesting. First of all, it's 9:30 at night. It's a little cool outside, so what has happened is the dew has made the track really slick. Now, these cars go 100 miles an hour down this straightaway, so it could be pretty interesting.
But the dew is setting in, and the racetrack, the water is on top of the pavement, and it is really slippery. I mean, in that semi, I just kind of basically coasted with the car, and it's really slick. Really, really, really slick. It's hard to, you can't use the horsepower you have. You can't really turn the car. It's slick.
The final ended up going off before a very sparse crowd at Mosport, and it remains to be seen whether this type of racing will catch on in this country. It appears the race for recognition is a lot more competitive than any struggle on the track.
Okay, enough cards and letters. A couple of weeks ago, we did that feature on the special treatment for window glass, and you can see that the front half of this glass has a lot of distortion. The water's just sheeting, and the back half, the water just beads right off, and we can see quite clearly. We've had all kinds of inquiries about where you get it and just how it works. Now, here's the stuff I used a couple of weeks ago on the show, Repcon 2. It comes under a couple of names. Here's another one that we've got around the shop, Total Vision. It's a polymer coating that you put on the glass, and it's a really great thing. You just put it on and then buff it off until it completely disappears. And in the rain or snow, it's just amazing to drive the car. Your visibility is fantastic. Water just beads right off it. You can see through it perfect.
What's the car world coming to? Well, you can find out next on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
Never mind that 1990 isn't really the start of a new decade, because technically it's the end of the last one, but it's still a fair time to look ahead and see what kind of cars we're going to have over the next 10 years. One thing for sure, we're going to have cars, because despite the best efforts of government do-gooders and weasels that try to get us into buses and subways, the people have spoken, and we're going to drive home. Now, if you want to get a hint as to what the cars might look like, you can attend some of the car shows like the ones at Tokyo or Frankfurt or even Toronto and Montreal. And you'll see cars, something like this Subaru here. Now that looks like something that your father might have read about in Mechanics Illustrated 15 years ago, but this car actually drives and could well be in your driveway in a few years' time. It's getting to the point where I don't just get press releases on cars anymore. I get press releases on things like new material technology, which means I've got to be a metallurgist to understand what they're talking about. Now, one problem that nobody's addressed yet is who are going to fix these cars. The do-it-yourselfer is already out of business, and most mechanics are having trouble keeping up to date as well. For my part, as long as I can keep my 1976 American Motors Hornet running, I don't have to worry about it. This is Jim Kenzie for Motoring 90.
You get the feeling the Motoring 90 van is trying to tell me something?
Here, Brad, get to work.
Thanks a lot. Well, as you can see, I've got work to do. That's it for this week, but make sure you join us next week for more of Motoring 90. Keep the car clean.
Motoring 90 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.